Hit it, Phil. Can it be the breeze that fills the trees with rare and magic perfume? Oh, no, it isn't the breeze. It's Jackson time. La, da, da, da.
There we go. Well, hello again. This is Buck Benny speaking. We are here with Kathy Fuller-Seeley. We are here with Terry Phillips, and we're here with John Henderson.
Hello.
I'll talk about this on air, whatever. It doesn't matter. I should have talked about this ahead of time. I was thinking, I was watching I'm trying to line up the beginning show. So we're gonna always have chronologically try and feature every Jack Benny appearance that he has. So sometimes they're not going to be on the actual Jack Benny show. In this case, this is an episode, it's a very rare episode we're presenting today. I wouldn't even have had access to it more than a year ago, and it's a fun episode. So we'll talk all about that. But I was just thinking how we go around and I just kind of say everybody as I introduce them each week. I was watching one coming up here is What's My Line? And that Jack appears on, that we'll be sharing when we get to that. But I kind of like the way they introduce each other. What's My Line? Where they introduce the first person, and then that person says, and the person to my left is so-and-so, and that person to my left is so-and-so. They just introduce each other as they go. And I thought, well, we'll have to try that someday and introduce each other. But the problem is, we appear differently on each other's screen. So we're going to be saying the person below me, and it won't be the person below you. And we're like, the person somewhere on the screen right now is so-and-so. Anyway. But Terry has an announcement to make. Terry, why don't you tell us about the newest show?
Well, after a fairly long hiatus, we're back with another episode of Imaginaire Theater. It will probably come out this weekend if you're listening in mid-November. It'll be out either the 20th or 21st, I believe, of this month. And it's called The Woke Detective.
Okay. That is an intriguing title. I can't wait to listen to that. I just love how your shows are reminiscent of radio shows, what they were, in history, but they're very current. They're very the writing you've decided to go with is a very current take on things that you would never hear in an old-time radio show, because a lot of these things you're mentioning didn't even exist. So that's really cool. All right. Well, I can't wait for that. Let's, John, we haven't talked about your shows in a while or anything. You got any new things going on, or?
Well, I did a 2-year project where I was doing the old-time radio shows from the Bible, and I'm wrapping that up in the next couple of months. And then after that, we're approaching my 39th birthday. So I'm excited about that.
Wow, good for you. Good for you. Yeah, I'm on my, 25th, 39th birthday or something like that. So, so we'll be the same age. That'll be cool, John. I'm just a little more haggard for my age than you are. I don't know. Kathy, you got anything new coming on? Or?
No, it's exciting to hear that the Jack Benny International Jack Benny Fan Club is proposing another Benny convention in February 2023. Contributors are coming up with wonderful things, and I hope this group will come up with a great idea for contributing to it too. So
I hope so too. That would be great. Okay, and we'll come up with something. So I already have something in mind, so it's all good. Well, let's get on to this episode. So this episode is known as the 60-piece orchestra episode. So it's got a spoiler built in the title. You are going to see a 60-piece orchestra at one point, which is fun. We'll just go around the horn and see what people thought about it. I really enjoyed it. It's not, I'll warn you right now, the video quality of this episode is not that great. But like I say always, I'm happy to get these episodes in any kind of quality. Certainly we presented one recently that was, all we had really was audio of parts of it, things, but what we have is what we have. So Terry, what were your thoughts on this one?
Well, first, I guess we should say that this was broadcast originally on January the 25th of 1953. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a lot of television in early 1953, but this was a real standout program because, of course, Jack Benny was one of the most, if not the most famous and admired of radio performers, but had started to make his mark in TV. And so I don't know what the ratings were. Maybe Kathy can tell us, but I'll bet it had a pretty good share of the audience.
Yeah, I would think so.
As I was listening to this, a couple of things jumped out at me. One was, I don't know why I never thought of this before, but there are only two people I can think of in history who became famous for the way they pronounced the word well. And one was Jack Benny, and the other was Ronald Reagan.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this episode had a lot of stock references, his age, his cheapness, playing the violin. And as we've talked about in the past, even though these were not new ideas, they still made us laugh. Every time he opened the door to one of these, it just made us giggle because we knew what was coming, and that was part of his brilliance. Speaking of the violin, Jack Benny, again, was one of only, in this case, 3 comics I can think of, comedians, who were also excellent musicians. The other 2, well, actually, I should say there were 3 others because 2 were brothers, the Smothers Brothers, excellent musicians, and Victor Borge, a fantastic pianist who made a career making fun of playing the piano and telling jokes while playing the piano.
Yeah.
There's a reference here that some people might not get. At one point, someone mentions the name Vera Zorina. I don't know how many people will know that name today, but she was a very famous ballerina. This was when, well, I don't want to say too much about when this happens, but anyway, it comes out at one point. She was also, by the way, married to George Balanchine. So she was, the ballerina of ballerinas in the 1950s and before. The last note that I have here is, well, there's no point in hiding the fact that Jack Benny, as many of us already know, really was a terrific violinist. And I've known that for a long time. I didn't know it as well as I saw it in this episode.
Agreed.
And if this was the only part of, if they'd left out everything else, all the jokes, the storylines and everything, and if the only thing we saw was Jack Benny playing violin, it was worth every minute and every dollar that they put into producing this thing. It was fantastic.
Yes. And at this time, I think people didn't realize how good of a player he was. This is right at the time, and who knows, he could have been thinking about this show in the back of his mind too, but this is right around the time when he really started practicing again, really started putting effort into it for a number of years, maybe a couple, 3 years before this or something. I can't remember. He does say in one of his interviews or his book or something, like when he got back into playing every day, practicing every day, and a long time. I think he said he was practicing sometimes 3 hours a day and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Johnny Carson once asked him on the Tonight Show whether he practiced, and Jack said, "Johnny, you have to practice the violin just to be lousy."
That's right. That's right. And so he said that he really improved his violin playing over doing that, and then he really showed it to us. He's really quite good. Anyway, Kathy, what do you have for us?
Oh, well, I was really, thank you. I'd never seen this episode before, so it was wonderful to experience it. I believe that it was a live show, so we've got a kinescope of it here. And I was really struck by how very early TV-ish that opening scene in the dressing room looks so much like the October 1950s first television show.
Yes.
So while I know this was done in Los Angeles, I felt really early television there. And when they moved to the scene with the orchestra, though, I saw another element of television, of growing into the big spectacles. So I enjoyed both of that. At the end, I found an original review of the show from Variety, because Jack was only in 1953, I think he was only on about 8 or 9 times a year. And so the TV industry considered every one of these a special. So just as you say, viewership would have been really high. Andy gets the special treatment of reviews of individual shows that won't happen when he's on every week. And the critics love this show, and I'll talk in a little bit about why.
Okay.
So, but I want to hear from John.
Yeah. So I'm going to dovetail on something you said, though. You talked about the beginning and its look. The thing that struck me at the beginning was Rochester and his coat that was the exact same pattern as his shirt. So it was a strange looking outfit, but I thought that looks like an expensive outfit. Actually, so I was like, that's nice. That's nicer than Jack usually wears, but it doesn't really work for today. You wouldn't have a matching. It looks like almost like a sci-fi. Whenever you see sci-fi, they like try and do something different with a suit. There's no collar. There's something different about it. And so it just struck me as one of those sci-fi type of suits. But anyway, over to John. What did you think, John?
Yeah, I love all of these early episodes of Jack Benny when they're looking so young and they've got the right amount of energy and everything like that. But I'd never seen this episode, and I've always read, the list of episodes, and this is right towards the beginning, so it's like, oh, 60-piece orchestra. I wonder what that's like, and I've never been able to see it till now. So this was very exciting. I loved it. I like how on the Jack Benny show, both the radio show and here on the television show, he's talking about putting on a show, and there's a lot of like backstage stuff, and he mentions things that are happening on the show, but then we never see that, like the bird flies down on his head or whatever he references. Yeah. And they're really good, especially in these early days of television, at pulling the best parts of the radio show with like, the format of having an interviewer interviewing Jack Benny, and some of the best jokes. And, what he was doing on stage. I'm sure he did some of this violin stuff on stage. If not now, eventually he would, because I've seen some of the recordings and I heard him talk about it. And he says that he is okay at the violin. He can pass at the violin, but sometimes he's doing 60% and he's just faking the rest, And I feel like in this episode, if you watch it, you'll be blown away. But then if you think very carefully, you'll notice he is maybe cutting some corners, or maybe like there's a second violinist that's sort of helping him out, fill in the blanks a little bit. I don't know, but you might want to,
okay.
So, but the whole scene with the orchestra and the way that he does it, he almost pulls it off that it's totally unplanned. Because he seems genuinely surprised by all these hilarious things that are happening. I guess I won't spoil it, but it was great.
That's great.
I always loved Don Wilson. I love the Don Wilson bit. And even like leading up to it where, he's saying, I don't want to do that, the kind of thing that he does on the radio show. I just think that his delivery is perfect. He's not trying to, even when he's doing something that's totally Don-centric, it seems like he's not trying to steal the scene, but he's just going along with things, and that's what makes him so likable.
Excellent. I agree with all that, and I did probably of all the episodes that I can think of, and there's got to be another standout one somewhere. I love Don Wilson. I love Don, just what he does, what he brings to the show, what he brings to the radio show, what he brings to the television show. But this one gives a nice little spotlight to him that you just don't see in many episodes, and I just loved it. And it was funny, and I laughed, and his whole thing about where he's angry with Jack because Jack's forcing him to do something always seems kind of strained or whatever. This one just seemed right on the money. I would be complaining about this one left and right, and his outfit they got for him was just fantastic. Terry, you wanted to throw something.
And he's a good dancer.
Yes.
Who knew?
Very good. That made it even funnier, is that he was actually pretty good, and he didn't like halfway. I mean, that looked like him really trying to pull off that dance, and it worked. It was great. It was great. And then the other person that I need to mention on here, because she was only on 4 of the television shows, but she was on a ton of the radio shows, is Sarah Berner, and she does just a great job whenever she's on the radio. It's fun to see her in the television show, and what endears her to me even more is whenever we do recreations, John's wife does her part, and she just does a beautiful send up of Sarah Berner. Really, I sometimes think if I compared John's wife to Sarah Berner in their performance of the nasal songstress, I couldn't tell the difference. I mean, his wife nails it so well. So
Sorry,
Yeah.
Daryl, I might have misled you. Did you think that that was Sarah Berner playing the interviewer?
no,
Oh, okay, because that was Alex Talton.
no. Sarah
So then
Berner
I
was
have
on a
to
different.
confess, I didn't see her in
Oh,
this.
maybe she was.
She was in the Fred Allen.
You guys were supposed to correct me on these sorts
Sorry,
of
she
things.
was in the Bogart episode that we'll be talking about later.
Oh, she was Moger. Okay, well, we'll get there. So
Yeah.
forget about what I said about Sarah Berner. In fact, I'll probably cut out this part and move it over. But well, we shall see. But anyway, let's get on to the review that.
Well, as I said, I'm always fascinated by trying to get a snippet of the past and how, especially Benny's shows, were understood at the time, because sometimes we have rather different opinions today. And so the reviewer from Variety said, monthly viewers of Jack Benny's television program have come to expect surprises. To him, the best format is no format at all, and no better proof of this reasoning was needed than yesterday's offbeat display of comedy and musicianship. That it lacked the usual cargo of laughs detracted little from the high qualitative level of his past offerings. His best it may not have been, but entertaining it was. From the onset, it was a buildup for Benny's appearance before a 60-piece symphony orchestra as violin soloist. Alex Talton from Pictures set the scene by interviewing the comedian about his career in show business. Save for a few extraneous bits, such as Don Wilson's doing a ballet dance as a tobacco leaf for the mid-commercial, and fiddles broken overhead, all lines led to Benny's concertizing. The laughs were sporadic because of the show's main theme, but when come they did, they crescendoed into howls, especially Wilson's turn when he called silly and may not have been far wrong. The sight of the bulky announcer dancing on his toes was evocative despite the evident detachment. Once before the 60 Music stand fronted by Malin Merrick, Benny, in serious mien, stroked a chorus of Love and Bloom and then raced through a fast concert number reserved for such masters as Chrysler and Heifetz. It was all done without the usual humorous asides, and to the untrained ear, it came off as an acceptable rendition. But he couldn't resist Love and Bloom, and back he segued to it. For Benny, it was the longest serious segment in his 2 years of televising. He must have proven beyond reasonable doubt that he could really play the fiddle, although many must have assumed the concert piece was dubbed, which this reviewer was assured it wasn't. Benny gambled on this innovation and broke better than even. So again, I'm tickled that reviewers of the time really noted what we have, that that Benny never had a set sitcom formula in this show, and especially because he's now only going to be on once a month, that he takes these opportunities to always change it up, to do a before the show and after the show, a skit with a special guest, or something like this with a concert orchestra.
Yeah,
so
that was great. Thank you for sharing that. That's delightful. The other thing I wanted to point out, I was thinking that I wanted to say, was the young man who played Jack as a young violin, when he really looked like a young Jack. I was very impressed with how close he looked to Jack. And then the middle of the road Jack, the 20-year-old Jack, whatever he was, completely he was the most handsome Jack I've ever seen, and it didn't look anything like. Also, he was tall. It seemed like. I was like, wait a minute, that guy's too tall.
And they both seem to be competent, at least playing the violin.
Yes, the kid would seem more competent than the guy. The 20-year-old guy, you can kind of tell he was like not really doing parts of it and things. I mean, he got the. They really worked with him probably on the upstroke and downstroke, getting those in the right spots, and that was good. But the kid looked like he was actually doing the thing, and I was impressed. Yeah, and it's kind of sad how many violins were broken in this performance, but that's just the way it goes.
They went
I'm
to
sure
the
they're all
dollar
Stradivariuses or Stradivari. Yeah. John, you were going to say something?
Going to mention the smashing because it's sort of a surprise.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Since the reviewer mentioned it anyways, I got to say, when we cut to Jack after the smash, you can see he's just trying to hold it together, which is one of the fun things about live performances, when they're just like breaking or trying not to break.
Yes. So just a delightful episode all the way around. And I'm really glad that they pointed out because I was thinking the same thing. This is a more normal episode. This is not, there's no huge guest stars. There's no, there's no Marilyn Monroe here. There's nothing like that. And I look forward to those episodes, watching those almost more sometimes than the star vehicles. So it's neat that they have these interspersed, and to have this one where he plays the violin so well, as Terry was saying, you just, I've always wanted to see that. And I've got to dig around. He did a performance in 1961, let's say, and they filmed the whole, it was more or less his bit where he'd go around to all the different orchestras and perform and raise tons of money, saved so many orchestras across the country. He'd donate all the money that they would generate when he would come and play. And this is it looks like a filmed piece of that, pretty much. I want to say there was a floating around like whole performance of the thing, and then there was an edited down one. I definitely have the edited down one, but I think I may have the whole performance as well. We'll see. When we get to that time frame, we'll play that for you. But it's a pretty impressive piece too, because by that time he'd been playing another 7 or 8 years and even gotten better. So it's quite good. But anyway, we'll let you enjoy this show. Anybody else have any last things that we forgot in this one or anything? I think we're good. We're good. All right. Well, enjoy, and we'll see you guys next time.
From Television City in Hollywood, we bring you the Jack Benny Program, presented by Lucky Strike. In Boston, they say it this way.
For my part, I've always been a lucky smoker. They taste cleaner, and now I know the reason.
In New Orleans, it sounds like this.
I smoke Lucky's because they taste fresher. Now, I know the reason for that.
While around Seattle, you're apt to hear,
I like Lucky's because they taste smoother, and I can show you why.
yes, wherever you go, smokers recognize this as the symbol of better taste in a cigarette. Why? Because this firm, perfect cylinder of fine tobacco means Lucky Strike is made better to taste better. Notice how it holds its shape, without crumbling and without loose ends to spoil the taste. That's why Lucky's taste cleaner. And Lucky's are fully packed with long strands of fresh, good-tasting tobacco. And every pack of Lucky's is extra tightly sealed to keep that fresher taste. That's why Lucky's taste fresher. You can tell a Lucky every time by its fine, naturally mild tobacco, and by the way that tobacco is firmly packed, but perfectly shredded to always draw freely and smoke evenly. That's why Lucky's taste smoother. Yes, friends, you can tell by Lucky's rich aroma that Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. And you can see for yourself, Lucky's are made better to taste better. So,
For a cleaner smoke, a fresher smoke.
A smoother smoke.
make your next carton Lucky Strike. Be happy, go lucky, and enjoy a better tasting cigarette.
Yes, ma'am, I'll tell him. He ought to be back here in the dressing room in a few minutes. Goodbye.
It's a wonder I'm not a nervous wreck.
Why, what happened?
Well, first I had trouble with Don Wilson. And then you know that scene in the park where the pigeon flies down, supposed to stand on my head? What a time to lay an egg. I'm going to go over my script.
Oh, by the way, boys, Miss Bronson Bronson from TV Chronicle called and said you were expecting her over to interview you.
Oh, yes, she's come over to get the story of my... What's that supposed to be?
You told me to put a flower in your lapel.
I know, but that's too big.
You mean you want it smaller?
Well, of course.
Yes.
The whole coat. A little more off the side.
Yes. Would you like a part in the middle?
No. Hello?
Hello, Jack. This is Don Wilson.
Look, what do you want now, Don?
Jack, I'm sorry I walked off the stage during rehearsal, but I'm not going to do that silly commercial you wrote for me. It's ridiculous.
Don, it isn't ridiculous. It's got class. We'll be the first show on television to ever do a commercial that's based on a ballet.
But I'm not going to do it.
Well, you are going to do it, and I want you to come in here and try it out before we do it on the stage. Goodbye. Can't understand,
What's the
Don.
matter?
Every time I have a wonderful idea for a commercial, Wilson objects to it. I've never Yes?
I'm Miss Bronson from TV Chronicle.
Oh, yes. How do you do, Miss Bronson?
How do you do?
This is Rochester.
How do you do?
How do you do?
Sit down.
Thank
Sit
you
right
so
down.
much. Mr. Benny?
Yes?
You may not remember, but about 8 years ago, I interviewed you at the Roxy Theater in New York.
Oh, yes, the Roxy in New York, about 8 years ago, wasn't it? How time flies. Do you mind if I just sort of get freshened up a little with my makeup?
No,
Thank
not
you.
at all.
Thank you.
I made some notes then, and I'd like to recheck the facts.
Okay, fine.
Is your radio cast the same?
No, there's been a slight change. I now have Bob Crosby with
Bob
me.
Crosby.
Yeah.
I'll make that change. Do you still live at 366 North Camden Drive?
Yes.
No change. Are you still on radio for Lucky Strike?
Oh, yes, same sponsor.
No change. And I see that Rochester's still your butler.
Oh, yes, Rochester's been with me for 14 years. And I might add, Miss Bronson, that he's more than a butler. He's been my trustworthy friend and a genial companion and also, at many occasions, a personal confidant.
14 years. Now, about his salary.
No change.
Look, trustworthy friend, I can answer the question. Now, if you really want to do me a favor, go out and get me a sandwich.
Yes. How about Miss Bronson?
Well, Rochester, I can't send Miss Bronson out for a sandwich.
I mean, maybe she's hungry.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Would you care for a sandwich?
No, thank
Go right
you.
ahead.
Mr. Benny, I'd like to ask you a personal question.
Oh,
now,
yes.
I know you're a very modest man.
Well, yes, I am.
I want a real story about your career. I'd like to capture the true feelings of a man who's been as successful as you are as a comedian.
Well...
it must be a great satisfaction for you to have reached the fulfillment of your life's ambition.
My life's ambition?
Yes, you must be an extremely happy man.
Miss Bronson, I've never told this to anyone before. But being a comedian was not my life's ambition. And it has not brought me happiness.
What?
Well, what does a comedian leave to posterity? Here I am, going on 40. What have I done that the world will remember?
But, Mr. Benny, you pursued a career that's brought you phenomenal success.
Oh, Miss Bronson, I mean, success doesn't always bring a man happiness.
But your success has brought you such fame.
Well, even fame doesn't always bring you happiness.
But, Mr. Benny, look at all the money you've made.
Miss Bronson, money doesn't... Miss Bronson, real deep down, I consider myself a failure.
You a failure?
Yeah.
Why, what did you want to be?
I want to be what I started out to be. A concert violinist.
A concert violinist?
Yes.
But, Mr. Benny, are you really sincere?
Sincere? Why, Miss Bronson, I can remember many years ago when I was a child back in Waukegan. And I remember when I was 6 years old, I had already taken up the violin. And even at that tender age, I knew what I wanted to be. And I used to practice hour after hour. And I let nothing take me away from my violin. Absolutely nothing. It wasn't easy, but still I let nothing deter me. I was convinced that I could be a concert violinist, and I was going to stick. Hello?
Jack, this is Don Wilson again. I've made up my mind. I'm not going through with that commercial.
Don, I'm not going to argue with you over the phone. Now, look, you've got the dressing room next to mine, so come in here and we'll try it. Don Wilson. Here I write a wonderful commercial based on a ballet, and Don doesn't want to do it. Miss Bronson, this is Don Wilson.
Oh, I thought it was Vera's Arena.
Don, this is Miss Bronson.
How do you do? Oh, Jack, this is most embarrassing.
It isn't embarrassing, Don. This is very, very clever. Now, look, do you mind, Don, I wanted to go right on the stage. Do you mind if we rehearse it here?
Oh, no, not at all.
Now, look, now, Don, I'll put on the record, and I want you to do it just the way we're... Now, don't be embarrassed. There's nothing wrong with it at all.
Oh, all right.
Now, here, I'll put on the record, and, Miss, you know, I wrote this myself, you know. And, Miss Bronson, you see, Don represents a tobacco leaf who lives in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Now, let's get acquainted with this happy little tobacco leaf. I want to read you what I wrote here. Now, one day, this little tobacco leaf heard that auctioneers from the American Tobacco Company, makers of Lucky Strike, were coming to Goldsboro, which made her very happy. Now, the reason for this ecstasy was because she knew that she would be selected to go to the big factory in the city because she was so round, so firm, and so fully packed. Now, one day, this little leaf that was so light and naturally mild was romping through the tobacco field. When suddenly her little heart skipped a beat. Now, the reason her little heart skipped a beat was because she heard the mating call. LSMFT. LSMFT. Married. And quicker than you can say no loose ends, she became the mother of a carton of Lucky Strike. exactly the way I want you to do it on the show.
It's the last time I'll ever do a silly thing like this. Now, goodbye.
Isn't that awful? Why, I thought it was a very clever commercial that I wrote, didn't it?
Well, getting back to your life's ambition, Miss Binney.
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, where were we?
Well, you had just finished telling me how you practiced when you were 6 years old.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, I struggled with my violin, and before I knew it, I was 17 years old. You see, and if I do say so myself, my tone and my technique had improved tremendously. So then I was, of course, more determined than ever that nothing could keep me away from being a concert artist. Nothing. While I was gluing up my violin, I enlisted in the Navy. And then 4 years later, when I got out of the service, I was sidetracked into vaudeville and then radio, and of course, and then television.
Mr. Binney, you used the word sidetrack.
Yes, Miss Bronson, because I am firmly convinced that if I had continued with my career as a violinist, that today, instead of walking out on the stage and telling silly jokes and being a clown and a buffoon, that I could be a concert violinist, playing with a symphony orchestra, directed maybe by someone like Toscanini or Stokowski. Yeah, I can see it now. You can just see 3,000 people jammed in the Philharmonic Auditorium. The orchestra is already on the stage.
Friends, in cigarette, it's the taste that makes the difference. And Lucky's are made better to taste better. Cleaner, fresher, smoother.
Cleaner? Yes, indeed. When you take the paper off a Lucky Strike, it remains a perfect cylinder of fine tobacco without annoying loose ends to spoil the taste. Fresher? Of course. Lucky's long strands of fresh, mild, good-tasting tobacco are made into a cigarette that's round, firm, and fully packed to give you a fresh-tasting smoke. And smoother, you bet. Lucky's fine tobacco is firmly packed, yet perfectly shredded to draw freely and smoke evenly.
So remember, friends, for a cleaner, fresher, smoother smoke, you just be happy. Go Lucky and make your cigarette Lucky Strike.
Be happy, go Lucky, get better taste today.
Thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you noticed I had a 60-piece symphony orchestra there. You see, at $100 a man, that's $6,000. So don't call me cheap. Of course, I got a little of the money back because I rented them their tuxedos. But ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce a very dear friend of mine who's backstage and who starts her own, and a very fine actress too, by the way, who starts her own television show next Sunday. And I'd like to have you meet Miss Ann Southern. I do want to congratulate you. And you know, Ann does her first show for the next Sunday for the American Tobacco Company for Lucky Strikes, and it's a situation comedy called Private Secretary.
That's right, Jack.
Well, tell us something about the show.
Well, it is a situation comedy, Jack, as you said, and it goes on this network at the same time, 3 Sundays out of every 4.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you see, I'm on 3 Sundays in a row, and then you're on every 4th Sunday. Now you know that, don't you?
Yes, my sponsor's lawyer made that very clear.
As for the show itself, I play a private secretary to a big talent spouse, you see, and I'm always getting into trouble.
Oh, well, that sounds good. You know, Ann, I'm going to be a guest on one of your shows.
Oh, you are? Well, I'm in trouble already.
Well, you see how it works out? Say, Ann, I have a little confession to make to you, that since I have played this number with the symphony orchestra, did you like it? Well, thank you. But since I did, I've sort of been thinking it over, and I don't know, maybe if I had become a concert violinist, I wouldn't have had success and made any money or had a beautiful home in Beverly Hills or a swimming pool. Maybe I should just remain a comedian, huh?
Yes, well, maybe, yes.
Well, then, do you mind?
Well, not at all, Jack.
That's about the silliest.
And Kay Wiley. Remember, next week at this same time, over these same CBS television stations, Lucky Strike will present Private Secretary starring Ann Southern. The Jack Benny program has been brought to you by Lucky Strike, product of the American Tobacco Company, America's leading manufacturer of cigarettes.
Top Variety, Toast of the Town on the CBS television network.